Everyone, 86 Boxing here, Joshua Brewer, along with the esteemed, renowned historian, author, Connecticut Boxing Hall of Famer, you name it, Mark Allen Baker. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
Very good, Joshua. Thank you very much for having me this evening. Looking forward to it.
No problem at all. This is one interview that I was very much looking forward to. Second time around here for you, Mark, being on the 86 Boxing channel. So it's definitely an honor having you here in the mix. Last time had a lot of good conversation. We had a lot of people who enjoyed the overall stream, and of course, now you've taken it up another notch because you've been back in the lab brewing up something pretty nice. So I'd imagine you may have been in the midst of writing at the time you came on last time around, huh? Just thinking about it there. So you have a new book on Johnny Kilbane.
Yes,
Johnny
sir.
Kilbane, the Irish American featherweight champion who had a very long reign as featherweight champion as well. So we can jump straight into the mix. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you, Mark, was why Johnny Kilbane?
That's a good question. I've been fascinated, as you can tell, with the lighter weight classes. Naturally, everybody jumps on the middles and the heavies, which is understandable, and a lot of boxers like those divisions because that's where the money is, or was all the money has been in the past until recent years, modern history. But for me, it was fascinating because it takes me into that level down from Abe Attell. After writing Abe Attell's biography and learning about Johnny Kilbane, I had all these different thoughts running through my head. Who is this Kilbane? What is he like? I got Attell's total perspective on his reign and why his reign ended where it did and why it didn't go further. And that was thanks to doing a biography in Johnny Kilbane. Now I got a totally different view. I've got Attell's on one side, I got Kilbane's on the other, and as you go further down, I get everybody from Canzoneri to Willie Pep. So it's been nice writing about the feathers. It puts a lot of pieces together for me, and from that perspective, I liked it. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't know that much about Johnny Kilbane until I actually started digging. And then once you start digging, you find things out, and you find a lot of misinformation, and all of a sudden you get a different perspective. And all I can say is, and I said it on my Facebook page, was, boy, I had relatives that are less than 40 kilometers from Achill Island, Ireland, and the name Kilbane rolled off the tongues of my great grandparents. And it's just, I hope that we share a lot of surnames. I don't know Johnny's total genealogy, but I'm often wondering, maybe we are distantly related. I hope that's the case after learning about him. I can't say that about everybody, but I can say that about Johnny Kilbane.
Yeah. Hey, you never know. You truly never know, but there might be a connection somewhere down the line there. And it's pretty amazing. So you spoke on sort of the lighter weights, but it's just in general, we're thinking about Irish American fighters, Irish fighters, just what it means just overall to the sport in terms of the impact that Irish fighters have had on the sport in general. There have been a number of legendary champions who come from that lineage. I think about John L. Sullivan. His parents came over during the potato famine, or at least right as they were getting to the height of that. They ended up coming over. Of course, John L. Sullivan being Irish-born or American-born Irish descent. And there have just been a number of great fighters of Irish descent in lineage in history in the sport of boxing. So I think that when you're thinking about boxing and its history, it's a story that can't be told without mentioning some of these big names. And Johnny Kilbane, he falls right in line with that, even though he is a name that probably doesn't have the same fervor as he had back in the day. Once you
Right.
start to dive into his actual resume and look at his legacy and what he did, then he really starts to shine. That's what I saw in terms of just
Absolutely.
looking him up even more once I found out that you were writing this book.
Yeah, and I take that whole Irish slant throughout the whole book out of tribute to him. Whenever I write about somebody, I try to dive right into where their mindset is. So I talk about his family on Achill Island, and how his parents came over. And then I talk about all the great Irish fighters and the transition and even the parallels between the Jewish fighters and the Irish fighters and the Italian fighters. And I work all that in because that was such a big part of the fight game, because ethnicity sold. Ethnicity sold, and the promoters knew that. And anytime they can, place that those kind of rivalries together, they knew they would have a bestseller. And they wrote on Kilbane. Naturally, Kilbane's born in Cleveland, born in the Midwest, in the section called the Angle. And the Angle was a predominantly Irish section of Cleveland. And in the words of their own historians, they put the Irish in the Angle because nobody else wanted the land, and they made it into something.
Yeah.
Johnny worked where a lot of the Irish guys worked, down into the freight yards, and everything from loading and unloading to being a switchboy on Whiskey Island, where all the railroads were coming into. And Johnny, his father ended up going blind, and Johnny had lost his mother when he was very young. And so now all of a sudden Johnny gets thrown in to, guess what, I'm going to have to work. And he works in the rail stations down in Whiskey Island. And it's a tough life, but a lot of people did it, and it was a good experience for him. But
awesome.
that's you talk about Irish. That's he lived where all the Irish people lived. He even sparred with a lot of people in his own neighborhood. One in particular, Tommy Kilbane, early, who was everything I read, and I still think this can't be correct. They weren't related. They lived on the same street. They lived on the same street, Josh.
Yeah.
I mean, a stone's throw. They could play toss the football to each other practically. But they swore they weren't related, and there's quite a parallelism there because Tommy Kilbane came from a very well-off, educated family, and he was it was kind of interesting because Tommy would fight just for the sake of fighting, where Johnny was paying the bills. So the rivalry was tough, and in fact, years later, Johnny would say that his toughest fight was a bootleg battle that he had with Tommy way back in the old days, win 25 rounds. It's a great story, great rivalry. I think it was like 1908 when it happened.
Okay.
Something, it was 1908. 25 rounds they went, and it was a bootleg battle. Now this is right out of the boxing history books, because they don't tell they get hundreds and hundreds of people interested in the bout, and they've got rail cars going to the secret destination, and they're setting up a ring in the middle of the woods, initially, and then they moved it into a barn, and they hammered the windows shut, and it was an incredible fight. It went 25 rounds, and what a great way to start a career. Those guys going hammer and tongs at it, as they used to say. And that was the first thing that got me going with Kilbane. I'm reading, the rough childhood and all this stuff, and moving along, and then all of a sudden I run across this great story with him and Tommy Kilbane. And I loved it. It's one of those discoveries, you're like, oh my God. I mean, it was everything.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome right there. I did happen to read of that real quick. I want to say shout out to Flat Boxing, who dropped in here with Mark Allen Baker, 86 Boxing. We're on the podcast. We're having a discussion, Johnny Kilbane and more. Shout out to Ranger Danger as well, who happened to drop in, and happens to be an author himself. Yeah, if there's any advice for a self-published author,
yes, persistence, and nowadays nobody's ignoring self-publishing anymore. Okay, that wasn't the case 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Persistence and belief in your own work, and for crying out loud, get the work out. They've got to see the work. Build your base, but persistence. Don't quit. Believe in yourself. Believe in it. You have a good idea, and a good idea is a good idea regardless. If you had it 10 years ago, you still think it's a good idea. It's a good idea. I've had books on the shelf for years, and then gone back to them and sold them because they were a good idea. And so believe in yourself and go forward with it. persistence.
Thank you there, Mark. Appreciate you sharing that. And then big shout out to Dan who dropped in as well. Says Tyson is a big fan of Johnny Kilbane. Of course, Tyson loves the history of boxing, so not surprised there. Thank you from Ranger Danger. But yeah, appreciate it, Mark. Certainly. So Tommy Kilbane, I was reading up on that as well. And Mark, I was saying to myself, no way that these families aren't somehow related. There is no way. They can't tell me that they're just Kilbanes there in Ohio with no relation whatsoever. And these two guys, these are two cousins that have just been fighting and beating up on each other, essentially.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And the funny thing of it is, as it moved along, their careers moved along, they ended up under the same management. And this is another thing I want to bring up is part of Johnny Kilbane's success was a wonderful manager named Jimmy Dunn. Okay, and in fact, there's a lot of stories on how he acquired Jimmy Dunn. I'll let you, when people get the book, they can read up on all that. But Jimmy Dunn was integral to the success of Kilbane, of taking him from one point in his career to another. Not at the end, but during the middle part, that was essential for Kilbane. And the good things about Dunn was a fighter himself. He fought Abe Attell. Okay, he ran about, I think he did about 35 fights. He was out of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, a wonderful sports town. If you know anything about athletes, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, from Chuck Tanner, the baseball guy, great Pirates manager. And then they had many boxers come out of Newcastle, great fight market. And Jimmy Dunn really carried Kilbane till about 1920 when Johnny broke off from him. Okay. But I think Jimmy Dunn should be in the Hall of Fame. I really do. If it wasn't for him, Kilbane wouldn't have been where he was. That's a fact. Wow. And there's interesting stories on how he met Jimmy Dunn and what Jimmy Dunn did for him. And I highlight all of that. And they got very close. And they lived close together at one point too.
Yeah. I know we've had a discussion on that before. We were talking about just the number of individuals who likely should be in the International Boxing Hall of Fame played critical roles to the careers of some of these great fighters. And so I wouldn't doubt that one bit there. And that's pretty amazing just to have that length of time with him, because I'm seeing that Johnny Kilbane started around 1907. To think that he was with the manager up until 1920 or even in that time frame.
Late 1919 or early 1920 was
okay, because I know that some boxers, that isn't always the case. They bounce around, they move on to different individuals for varying reasons, of course, some good, some bad, so you just never know. So I think that is a testament in itself right there, just thinking about that they were together so long.
Yeah, and they had a good solid relationship. I mean, for example, when Jimmy got married, the Kilbanes, they traveled together. The couples traveled together. They had a nice West Coast trip, and a lot of the pictures surfaced periodically with the Dunns and the Kilbanes out in California, out when Johnny was fighting out in Vernon, where a lot of the great fights took place. And of course, that's where he got his title from Abe. So, and they had a great fight with Mexican Joe River. One of the hardest hitting. He was like the perfect setup man for any promoter out in Vernon. It's like, set him up with Rivers, because if he's halfway decent, he'll beat Rivers. He's worth promoting. If he can't get through Rivers, why bother? Rivers was a tough fighter. But Kilbane. And here's another marvel that got to me, and this is something your audience will like too, is here it is, Johnny Kilbane. You talked 1907 and 1923. Interesting fact, though, is how many boxers can you go back to that had a title for 72% of the time they were a professional boxer? He had a title. He didn't know what it was like to fight without a title.
Right.
And this is what really got to me. And it's a different mindset. Attell went 9 years roughly, I think.
Yeah.
But he defended a lot, and he defended a lot more than Kilbane did. And we'll get into defending titles, because that's a big area of Johnny Kilbane. But it was 11 years and 3 months for Kilbane. That's how long he carried it for. Unimaginable at this point. Unimaginable for anybody to be that dominant, but criticized. You know,
Oh yeah.
Attell, anybody opened their mouth against Attell was in the ring with him. Not so much with Kilbane. Kilbane, you met his terms or you didn't fight. And his terms, and this is another transition thing, and the things that we can talk to, is he's in the no decision era, okay?
Oh yeah.
Pre-Walker laws, okay? So he fights. I mean, at its peak was 122. That's where he fought. He even balled to fight at 126. He finally ended up fighting at 126, but he always wanted everybody to meet him at 122. That's the weight he wanted to meet him at, though. But you had to meet his terms.
I saw that.
And those terms got tougher and tougher.
You know, I saw that because I was reading, and I think I looked on Box Rec and I saw that his first featherweight title, which I guess was the Attell fight, or when he essentially won it. I saw 122 listed there for that, at least on Box Rec, but I saw that it mentioned 122 pounds. So that makes sense there. And I've seen that kind of parallel with, I did a video on Packy McFarland here recently, and he was another one who didn't quite like to fight at 135, which is the lightweight limit we're accustomed to now. But there have been points when it was at 133, or so rather, he didn't like to fight at 133. So whenever fighting at that particular point, and he came in usually around that 135 mark or somewhere in that weight range, and it was just a term of his, so he didn't want to take his body or put his body into compromise. So he often chose to fight at the weight that was comfortable for him. And you have to, I guess, put that into perspective with certain fighters. They have the weights that they want to be at, and they kind of stick to their guns in that sense as far as how they go about it. But for featherweights, I think that's pretty good testament there. And to think 122 pounds, not a huge featherweight there. As a matter of fact, I'd imagine, he was probably going in with some individuals who had him in size in some sense there. Just thinking about it, if he was naturally comfortable at 122 pounds.
He was, definitely. And our people that he did fight heavier. I mean, he wasn't like a Jack Dillon who fought everybody regardless of what weight they were, but he watched it. You had to meet his terms. You know, he was strict on forfeits, very strict on forfeits. And again, Kilbane was an artist. He didn't have the power. His knockout percentage, I think it was around 25%. It wasn't not very, very. It wasn't high. He wasn't a power puncher. He got criticized a lot for that. A lot, and it bothered him, and it bothered these guys, especially then, because people looked at, he's moving. This was before defense was anything. And defense, as you know, after all the time we spent talking together, I mean, it grew from Attell to Kilbane, and then you get then you pinnacle at Willie Pep, right? Nobody's going to be better than that in the ring, and. It's just an interesting thing. It got to him. But when he left Dunn in late 1919, early 1920, Kilbane started calling the shots. Okay. He knew the Walker Law was coming in. He knew he'd be forced to fight. And this is what people don't know and they don't follow and read enough about is the transition. Just because the Walker Law came down and said, boom, these are the weight classes and you can fight here, blah, 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 blah. Not everyone gave in. If I'm not mistaken, there were 3 guys who held their own, and Kilbane was one of them. And he said, I don't care what you think at 126. If you're going to fight me for the title, you're fighting at 122. And he went at it. He went at it heavy. And this is one of the big battles that wasn't in the ring, but outside the ring with William Muldoon, with Big Bill Muldoon, the wrestler. And,
that's a name right there.
Chairman of NISAC, right? So. Yes. Anyway, they went at it tough. In fact, there's those politics. All this is covered. Another fascinating battle. It's Kilbane v. Muldoon, for sure. That was, or you can call it the Walker Law, whatever you want to look at. Wow. Muldoon was just trying to do his job.
Wow, didn't know that. Yeah, Muldoon, that's a name right there. Hard-nosed guy right there. Greco-Roman wrestler. He came up. He was actually trained John L. Sullivan for that contest with Jake Kilrain, that bare knuckle contest, like the last time they exchanged hands right there. Then I knew he was over the Madison Square Garden there as well. So he was a major influence. Didn't know that was the case. So hey, I'm sure that was a battle right there for Kilbane, because Muldoon, he seemed like a guy who was pretty hard nosed and pretty tough. Really, just from what I know of him and just some of his dealings overall. I mean, he was able to get John L. Sullivan on the straight and narrow for that Kilbane fight, until eventually it just like couldn't work out in the aftermath, at least in terms of them trying to connect again. So I can only imagine that was a battle between the two right there. So that's pretty awesome. So he was battling it out with Muldoon. Wow, crazy.
And also, another battle is him and Rickard, because when
wow.
Rickard started getting into the picture, which was about the time of the Walker Law, right in that time, a little before that actually. But anyway, by the time he came into Kilbane's radar, it was around that time. And Kilbane only fought once in the Garden, and he got many, many offers, but he hated the New York press. Hated the New York press with a passion. And he swore he'd never go back to the Garden after he fought the one time. And he never did. Never did. But Rickard would throw offers at him left and right. I mean, Rickard was creative, and he'd do anything possible to get his way. And those two went at it, hammer and tongs, which is unbelievable. But there's two big guys in boxing, Muldoon and Rickard, that if you want to be a successful boxer during that era, you do not want to mess with those two guys. There's your career.
Certainly, yeah, because Rickard, you could argue the greatest promoter the sport has seen, in terms of he was very innovative and he put on some very huge fights, some of the biggest fights in boxing just in general. So I can only imagine such. And I know even Jack Dempsey, he had a hard time there with Muldoon during a period when they were seeking a contest between him and Harry Wills here. Early 1920 time frame, or right before. So it's just right around in that time frame, and they were like, hey, you can't fight here unless you're fighting Harry Wills. So Muldoon, he could take a hard stand. So give it to Kilbane for sticking to his guns,
And that situation you just brought up is something that I play into the book, precisely what I told you about Rickard. And I've got that scenario right in the book. It was a perfect example. I used Dempsey and Wills. Dan threw up an interesting item. Is Kilbane went on to have a really outstanding career in public service. Okay, and he ran for sheriff. He didn't get it, but he served as an Ohio State senator. He did. He had 2 terms representing Ohio, and he also was a court clerk for a long time. Now, this brings up something else that I'd like to get out. This is me using your forum, so my apologies. Is authors write a lot. I always write the book I want to read. But of course, the publisher has their own ideas, right? So they're gonna take a look at the book and they're gonna chop. But I actually covered more about Kilbane's public service record, including Johnny wanted to pass a lot of reforms to boxing, and he didn't get them through. He did not get him through. He got him through one level, but he couldn't get him through the next level to get him passed as a law. But that brings up a good point, though, is he was a man very dedicated to public service. And, boy, just you talk about diversified. Boy, that was it.
Oh, yeah.
And he did a lot of other things, too. He had a health camp that he put a lot of money into. But again, not only are they fighting the system, but then you've got all the other elements in their life they're fighting, right? Because all of a sudden, here comes World War I. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, wait, all of a sudden comes the Great Depression, the stock market crash, Prohibition. I mean, these guys get thrown more curveballs. I mean, what if some of that happened today? I mean, it's an interesting thing, and bad enough facing a no decision era, for crying out loud.
Right.
I mean, I can't stand it like every other boxing fan, but and I cover a lot of that, and I cover a lot of, again, and I got to bring up more stories. We got a lot to talk about, so I'll try to talk fast. But there's just so much with the no decision era. I bring up a lot of that. Also bring up, I'm not afraid to bring up, I would sample like 10 different newspapers after a no decision, so you can see just how many were on his side or how many were against him, where they were from. I even in this I believe this is one of the books, and again, authors like myself, I wrote this book 2 years ago. It's just coming out now. I worked 2 years ahead.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I work. So I'm actually 2 books past Kilbane. So sometimes I
Hmm.
get my facts mixed up. So forgive me for
Can
that.
only imagine what's coming next.
Oh, gonna be some good ones. Let's put it this way. I think I'll be on your show. I hope again. I'll be hoping anyway. But there's just so many good Kilbane stories. Just so many good Kilbane stories.
All right, yeah, that's pretty awesome there. Now, I know you're mentioning no decisions. Before I get to that, I see Flack says you remember seeing an old self-defense video a while back with Kilbane. I remember seeing something as well. I know he worked with the troops. Uh,
Yes, you did.
I guess, and that was during World War One. So I
Right.
saw that aspect as well for sure.
Yeah, that tape's floating around. I think it was shot in Camp Sherman. And I bring up, you'll see a couple nice pictures of Kilbane, and you've seen him before, but they're in the book too as well. But him instructing, and
Okay.
there's videos of him instructing, and doing a lot of parallels. And I brought some of these up because they are interesting. Okay, I know you're an ex-Marine, and in self-defense, he draws, the parallels between bayoneting and jabbing and striking and all that. So of course, that was a big part of his life at the time. So, and a lot of people went through the camp, and Johnny taught a lot of them. And I bring up a lot of what he taught. I think it's important I think if you're going to read a biography, that was a big part of his life and his contribution to the troops in World War One. And so I cover that. I wanted to cover more. Another part, again, more of that got chopped out for time, and space.
Oh yeah. I know. Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, having to cut that down, so much information out there, especially when you're diving through. Certainly, you can go down a tangent for sure. Shout out to Boz Cobra who dropped in. He asked if Kilbane was from Belfast. He's born in here in America, right?
Yeah, born in Cleveland, and his family's from Ackle Island, which is northwest, about, as I mentioned, about 35 kilometers from Ennis, Ireland, where my relatives came from. And I didn't make it to Ackle, but I'm going to go at some point. And I don't know why I didn't go, but I didn't. But live and learn.
Hey, never too late, as they say. Never too late there, Mark.
Never.
So yeah, you get out there for sure. Now, in terms of the no decisions, you were bringing that up. Yeah, that is very interesting. And sometimes we get questions, things of that nature. People wonder, like you look at a record and it seems a bit odd or off or whatever. They may show as having only a certain amount of fights, but you see a bunch of them just kind of piled in on the record, especially if you're looking at certain sites. And it's because of the no decisions in that era and how boxing was at that particular time, with a lot of states, for instance, not allowing you to actually render a decision. Now, I know that on this channel, we always recognize them. And really, if you look at it, the writers of the day, they did a great job of covering those aspects of the sport, covering those fights real time. You can get what I would call play-by-play, the round by round of these actual fights, and it could allow for you to make a determination. You have many accounts of these, so I think that they should be widely recognized in the way that, like yourself, I recognize them, because these stories are really just kind of written out, and you can follow along yourself, and you can understand that beyond just the fact that the state was a no decision state or some other particular surrounding it being a no decision, these contests happen, and you could really identify a winner just based on how the fight went. And then, hey, not unlike judging in an official fight in the capacity that we do today, hey, sometimes majority rules. If the majority saw that X fighter won, then that's pretty much the case of what it was. I would say in that time. So I recognize them for sure.
Very true. And Kilbane's accepted record is 51 wins, 4 losses, and 7 draws, but he had 78 no decisions, and that's a lot.
Wow.
Some people listed at 1 or 2 no contests. I think it's just 1. Like all my books, I go through. I know there's other resources out there. And you know them all. Okay, I don't use them. I go straight to eyewitness accounts. I found more fights for Kilbane. I found more fights for Canzonieri. I found more fights for the next few people coming down the line. I'm proud of that. I also put in there for the user, the one thing that these other resources don't do is as you're moving along and there's a gap, I tell you why.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's suspensions.
Yeah.
It's a license suspension. It's a broken bone. It's a major development in their life. All these play into the fighter, and they're important. And that's why you got to go beyond the statistics. You got to look right at no decisions, and you got to see just how real those figures are. But you got to cover every fight. I know it's it's sometimes it's hard, okay, because some of these guys, are fighting each other dozens of times in some cases. And it's like, well, why is he fighting so-and-so again? Why is he fighting Tommy Kilbane 9 times? That kind of thing. That's one of the reasons is because nobody else wants to fight.
Right.
All right. You got to remember some of these boxers at the time would actually place ads begging for sparring partners, even at higher weight classes, because they can't find anybody. And but the no decision era was, it's tough, but you got to weigh it out. And Kilbane was averaging about 15 fights a year, roughly. But now think of somebody who will go beyond him, like Johnny Dundee. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Johnny Dundee fought over 40 bouts in 1911.
Insane.
Over 40. There's people in the International Boxing Hall of Fame who didn't even fight that much in a career.
Right.
Okay.
Which is amazing.
But this brings up again. As you're judging people, and I hate the biggest thing, and I think you're probably like this too, is the dislikes, is how easy it is, especially when I'm, if I'm not writing, I'm watching HBO boxing reruns, right? How easy some of these guys throw out names like Ali, throw out names like Willie Pep, throw out all the big guys, right? All the big stars of all the different divisions, they parallel. My one announcer will go nameless. Actually, thought a recent fighter had a left jab like Larry Holmes, and I almost got sick. Really?
Right.
And then parallels. Name one guy right now who's Willie Pep, and this person's name, and he's just like Willie Pep. Oh no, he's not.
No.
Oh, there's nobody like Willie Pep right now. There's a lot of good fighters. Okay.
Yep.
A lot of good ones, okay? And one of my favorites, of course, is Loma, right? Because Loma moves. Yep. I like Loma, I like Cotto, Miguel Cotto, those guys, okay? But they're not Willie Pep.
Right.
So stop using Willie Pep. Give them their own dues, but not Willie.
Yeah. Hey, I'm with you there, Mark, for sure. Sometimes, it doesn't compare those parallels. They don't go the same way there because different conditions right there. You think about Willie Pep and pretty much the gauntlet he had to go through, the amount of fights he had. You think about a guy like Johnny Dundee, Dan mentioned there as well. Just the amount of fights that he had, 300 plus fights. It's hard to compare him, like you said, to someone who has 40 fights or 50 fights, for instance, when this guy had such an enormous amount of contests he was a part of. And you just think about the litany of guys from back then. And there were a number of guys in the sport who were boxing at that particular time as well. And we know boxing, of course, here today, it isn't the most popular sport, for instance, in America. And at one point it was, and you had to think that was the main place to go to when you wanted to find that lottery ticket or that next big step in life right there. We're going into the sport of boxing because that's where you were going to get everything that you were seeking, essentially. And it's not the case right here in this modern time that we're in right now. So I always say that those individuals from back in the day, they were just different, built a little bit differently, and they had to go through some tougher conditions. So you're right, there isn't a Willie Pep here today. There isn't an Ali right now because they necessarily haven't had to go through the same conditions as fighters from that particular period, And we were just watching there's another channel we do some fight replays on. Fight Night Scores is what it's called, and there's an app where we go through, we rescore some older fights, and we were just looking at a fight last week. It was one from, I believe, the late 80s, or it might have been before that. And basically it was a 15 rounder. And we were talking about how, it's hard to even put in perspective the 15 rounders compared to the 12 rounders right now. And then at the top, we were mentioning that 25 rounder between Kilbane, the two Kilbanes, Tommy and Johnny, just
Right.
different conditions, just different types of fighting right there. And that makes it tough to actually compare. But I give the nod to those guys, just toughness that they had to go through back in the day.
Oh, very true, very true. And he fought other, the Vernon battles were long, no question. He fought. His only fight in the Garden was a good fight with Eddie O'Keefe. But again,
Okay.
the boxers had different outlooks. That's very, very, very true and a good point. I lost my train of thought here briefly, but anyway, somebody was talking about Johnny Dundee. Sorry. Johnny Dundee plays into this biography. He plays into, especially near the end. Okay.
Yeah.
The two fight. Johnny Dundee, I think, was very, very close to the same talent level as Kilbane. Maybe, they were give and take. They were that close. They were very, very, very talented individuals. Johnny Dundee, at the end, when Kilbane was fighting Nisek because Muldoon threatened to pull his belt, and he did. He did actually pull his belt before, and they had to wheel and deal. And he said, well, I won't pull your belt unless you fight Eugene Cricky or Johnny Dundee. And so that's where Johnny Dundee came in and challenged a lot of what was going on. And Kilbane had a choice, Cricky or Dundee.
Okay.
And he thought he made the right one with Cricky. But on the other hand, he still won because he got the belt from Cricky afterwards, right? So it wasn't that much fun.
Yeah.
And Cricky was a good fighter at the time. He was at the moment fighter. There's been a lot of like the hot fighter at the moment. Like Kilbane fought a guy named Danny Frush. And he was the guy at the moment. Everyone had to fight him. And we all have them. You go through them, right? You go through boxing history and you're like, yeah, but there was this guy and he fought, the name comes up is Bummy Davis, right? Bummy Davis at the time. Boy, you want to fight anybody, but you don't fight Bummy because he's a career ender. And he was, right? With Landers and Canzonieri. So, but that was the same with Danny Frush. They came in and said, okay, fight Frush because you'll never get by him. Well, Kilbane let him have it and got by him with no problem, and then let everybody else know the price just went up for his services. And he always kidded around because he said when he won the title, he made $3,600 for winning the title and $100,000 for losing it.
Wow.
Wow. That's how much he was paid. They wanted Kilbane out so bad.
Yeah.
They were willing to pay $100,000 to move him. Okay. And Cricky was the guy who did it, but if he didn't do it, Johnny Dundee would have, or Muldoon would have got made sure. Yeah, and it ended up Dundee and the three of them cut a deal. Everybody cut a deal, and that's how he ended up fighting Cricky. So.
And I was looking through his resume. And that's the thing that's pretty impressive by Kilbane, just his overall resume. I'm familiar with Danny Frush. Tough fighter there who had his moments, as you mentioned, for sure. And he's not a big name these days, but I've come across him in some other videos that I've made on some historic fighters. I'm trying to think. I wonder if he went up against Kaplan. They crossed paths in that time frame. But I'll have to definitely look back. But I'm familiar with Frush and Johnny Dundee. So they fought previously, right? In if I'm not mistaken, in
draw.
It was a draw. So, and maybe some papers had it for actually for Kilbane is what I'm seeing there. So, and that speaks volumes as well right there, because Dundee, he is one of those names, as you mentioned. I think, to really put it in perspective, you have to really go dig through his resume. But that's a guy who would go on to just have enormous mega career in the sport of boxing. You just look at what he did and who he fought. So that speaks volumes in my eyes right there. And that shows that Kilbane, hey, you're looking through his resume, you see he was willing to go up in there against guys who, like you said, some would not want to actually face. And it's pretty telling that you mentioned that some were begging for sparring partners. Yeah, you see that. I think that when you see some of that today, certainly there's probably those that would like a convenience in their time at the top of the sport, or or being involved in boxing. But when you go in with certain guys, Kilbane, I'm seeing is one of those guys like Johnny Dundee, the Abe Attells of the world, etc. Then it's not going to be an easy night, right? So if you have other options out there, then
Take them.
maybe I'll take that lesser route, as they say.
Yeah, there were people. They were hard hitters, boy. I mean, he fought other great fighters. George K.O. Cheney was one.
Oh yes.
One of the things and again, as I'm doing it, and I guess I've been lucky because I had a lot of background going way back to when the International Boxing Hall of Fame started. I used to work on the bios with Herb Goldman, and it was Herb Goldman, Hank Kaplan, Eddie Brophy, myself, and there might have been one other person. But I got a chance to really know how to dig, and a lot of things I don't agree with. Some of the resources I disagree with them. They have Alvy Miller as a championship fight for Kilbane. I disagree. Alvy Miller was a fun fighter. He was a very popular fighter, and I'm glad that they fought. But as far as the championship fight, nah, I don't think so. Yeah. And again, as you start digging, I mean, what happens in boxing, and I talked to Hank long time ago, it's like, why is all this disparity? He said the problem is these mistakes carry one generation to the next, and then whatever, and everybody starts believing, well, whatever this resource says, that's the Bible. Well, not always. Not always. I mean, you really got to check. You really got to dig. And I've found some instances, I think it was Canzanieri or Pep, I don't recall which one, where they were actually publishing articles. They were actually never saw the fight, never looked at the wire, and said Pep won, and here's how he won, and they just put it in. It was totally wrong. But they put it in the paper because they had to meet a deadline. Yeah. And so everybody says, well, according to this, yeah, but they were just meeting a deadline if you dig. And there's more stories. I try to unearth a lot of those so that you really get a good feel for what the guy was like. And another personal thing that, fortunately, Kilbane was very vocal, and Kilbane wasn't afraid to let everybody know aspects of his personal life. He was private to an extent, but some things he let loose, okay, which he would trash talk a little bit. I mean, he and Benny Leonard went at it like there was no tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
And Leonard remembered that. And when Kilbane didn't give just badmouth Leonard, not the way we know bad mouthing today, okay, but back then. So then when he fought Leonard again, Leonard wanted to cream him, okay, and he did. And did. But that Benny Leonard wasn't the same Benny Leonard that Kilbane fought the first time around. But that's another rivalry. And and Leonard said, well, Kilbane said all these bad things about Jewish fighters, blah 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 blah, and he let him have it. Okay, so I mean, it was that quick. So, who knows what he said, but Leonard let him have it, and he, you can talk the talk and walk the walk, and Benny Leonard walked the walk. Boz brought up Joey Maxim. Yeah, Joey Maxim was from Cleveland too. And another interesting thing, when Joey won, when Johnny won, Johnny won the championship. He took the train back in. It happened to be St. Patrick's Day for a lot of weather-related delays. But anyway, he came in, over 200,000 people waiting at the train station to greet Johnny Kilbane, the big hero, the big Cleveland hero. But an ironic thing is, when Joey Maxim won his title, they had a parade for Joey in the same way they had for Kilbane, and Johnny Kilbane was in the car that Joey was in. At the parade. And I talked to Joey. I talked to Joey about that. And I talked to Joey Maxim when he was at the Hall of Fame.
That is pretty
about that. And of course, every time you talk to Maxim, you got to talk Sugar Ray Robinson, right?
Yes.
Which is another. How bad was the heat that night?
Oh yeah,
one of those conversations. But
so what was his thoughts on that right there? Because Maxim, I didn't know Maxim was from Cleveland. That's crazy right there. But what were his thoughts? That's pretty awesome right there. That you got to talk to Joey. What were his thoughts on that night? As far as I know that it's that the heat got to Robinson, and that's why he ended up stopping.
Yeah, he thought the heat got to Robinson, but it had nothing to do with the weather.
His heat.
Anyway, but hey, they were two great fighters. I mean, wouldn't you love to watch that fight? And no matter how hot it was, Joey didn't have a lot of good to say about his opponent, but Nevertheless, it was great. I mean, how can you beat these two? I mean, Robinson,
Yeah.
the tip, he's the Everest right at the top.
Oh yeah.
And
Certainly.
you got to admire him from so many different levels. This is a sensational fighter. That's another guy. Don't compare yourself. I
Right.
mean, we've only watched Sugar Ray Robinson. I haven't seen anybody close yet.
Yeah. I know he's held in high esteem here in the sport. You're right. Talking the Mount Everest piece of it, certainly. But that's pretty awesome there that you got to be a part of or have conversations with Maxim and all. So yeah, I know you've been around the block there, as they say, Mark. So that's good stuff for sure. And I know there have been others you've interacted with. Yeah, and I was thinking as far as Kilbane, Abe Attell. Now, Abe Attell, historic fighter, the little Hebrew. I mean, he had a long reign there at featherweight. If I'm not mistaken, his reign might have been the longest at featherweight prior to Kilbane defeating him. Right. And I was looking because I had to take this down, just looking through his resume. And when Kilbane first fought Abe Attell, October 24th, 1910. Attell came in 92-9-20, had over 100 plus fights to Kilbane's just over 33 fights at that particular time. Just think about that experience gap right there. I mean, that is so huge. And Kilbane was able to be victorious. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, too, because, again, I mean, I thought after looking at them both, I really felt after writing Abe's biography, it was about 9 years plus, something like that. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it was the longest reign until Kilbane. But in a way, I always got the impression after digging with Abe that it was almost a burden, a monkey on his back. It got to a point where it was a monkey on his back. And it's unfortunate, too. And naturally, as soon as Kilbane takes the title, I mean, I'm laughing because I'm going through a lot of the research material saying, yeah, well, Attell was going to challenge him and he was going to do all this. And it was signed. And I said, oh, they're matched for XX date. There's no way. There's no way Kilbane was going to fight Attell again. No way. He had nothing to do with Abe Attell.
Yeah.
No, he had been, because Attell was a politician. When you go back and read, Abe was the perfect politician while he was champion, and he was the perfect trash talker when he wasn't, when he didn't get his way. So, so there's no way Kilbane would be nuts. He got offered ridiculous sums of money to fight him in San Francisco. What are you, nuts? Took fighting Attell in California?
Right.
I mean, really. Funny story. Spin-off on Attell. Here I go again, right? Monty Attell. Okay, Monty Attell, the bantam champion, right? His brother. Monty fights Kilbane, and this is true. This is a funny story. Kilbane clocks him so hard in the eye. Okay, Monty Attell had a cataract in one of his eyes, and Kilbane hit perfect and broke the cataract. And Monty lost the fight, but he got his vision back. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
I mean,
that is pretty amazing right there.
The perfect punch to solve his vision problems. I mean, you would think if you fought Monty Attell, you wouldn't want him seeing good. That's for sure.
That's pretty insane.
That was a funny story. And there were so many of these good ones. And I dig them up because I know it's hard to go through, for all the readers to go through the material as meticulous as I write it. But I always try to break it up with one of those you can't be serious moments, because every fighter has them.
Oh, yeah. No, that's pretty amazing right there. That goes to show you the lengths that these fighters will go through. He's in there with a cataract and, hey, it doesn't matter. He has a job to do and he's willing to fight and take on all comers. And that is pretty amazing right there. Funny story for sure there. So thinking about that, and this was something that just popped up because I know that's something that we brought up on the channel. We're thinking about like fighting brothers and like who's the greatest of the fighting brother duos, things of that nature. You have the Attell brothers out there. I think Dan had given them the nod. I like the Gibbons brothers as well. Absolutely. There, Mark. And hey, you have a number of them. I'm thinking of the two fighting brothers. Former welterweight champion. Why is his name escaping me? Mike Twin Sullivan.
Oh, Sullivan's.
and his brother. Yeah, it's some good ones out there, but maybe Abe and Monty, they rank up there at the top. Hey,
Yeah, and they had another brother, Caesar, that was a boxer too.
okay,
Wasn't as good, but there's three of them that fought, and it's funny too. I got a bunch of things I want to talk about, but it's funny that as I write these biographies, I'm in touch with so many families. I
okay,
mean, so many families going through,
yes,
which I thank them. Okay, I find
yes, certainly.
relatives. I mean, I can't even. I mean, I find everybody. I mean, they end up. Did you hear about so and so? I heard from Attell's relatives the night of the Connecticut Boxing Hall of Fame
Mm-hmm.
dinner. I heard from the Canzoneri family.
Oh wow, that's pretty
How's
awesome.
that for something? And we talked about it because there's things. Okay, there are things I don't bring up in books, right? For one reason or the other. I only have so much space and time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about some stuff there, and they respect my position, and I respect theirs. So it was
Okay,
good. It was all favorable and no nonsense. Now, one thing I want to bring up about Johnny Kilbane, the family man, and
okay,
you're going to learn this inside, is he had two children.
okay.
He loved his little girls, loved them with a passion. He had two. He had Mary and Helen. Okay, Mary lived a long life, and Helen passed away while Johnny was active. Helen
Oh
was
yeah.
born, and she passed away around 6 years old, somewhere in that time frame. But I cover that because it's
Okay.
a very heartwarming story of a father. And Johnny Kilbane was a father, and I'll bring this up too, is an excellent grandfather, a
Oh
great
yeah.
family man. And if you know, and a lot of people do, that there's a dedicated site to Johnny Kilbane. The Ackle Islands never forgot Johnny Kilbane. Cleveland has never forgot Johnny Kilbane. I think it's Herman Avenue now is named Johnny Kilbane Street or Lane or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
they love Johnny with a passion. He would be so proud, so proud of the people who remember him, especially his family. So I tip the hat to the Kilbane family for keeping keeping the legend of a great man alive.
That is pretty awesome. Yeah, I did actually. I've been by that site. I know he had, I believe, it's a great grandson that is alive and was very active and involved. I saw him in a little mini documentary video as well. There, as far as a mini video on YouTube there on Johnny Kilbane. So I think, yeah, that is high notch right there, and being able to be in contact and then having that history, because as we know, as you know for sure, there are a number of boxers who had these great past, and they don't quite have that same legacy, or it's not remembered in that same manner, even though they may have put in a lot of great work. So kudos and nods to the families out there helping to keep things alive, because these are pretty much warriors of the sport who gave a lot to the sport, at different times compared to now. And if you just think about it overall and kind of the money that they make now in the sport by comparison, and then it's really a trade in that sense, really blue collar in some sense in terms of how they went about it, because it wasn't always for the biggest bucks. And you highlighted that the gap between that $3,000 fight and the $100,000 fight for Kilbane there, and that goes to show. And that's a lot of fighting in between such, by comparison to kind of how it parallels here today. So I appreciate when we have some of these sites that are up that are kind of dedicated to the legacies of these fighters, because we've seen many great come through. And the way I look at it, anytime we could give them a little bit of shine, hey, that's a plus.
Absolutely, and that's and I've been told this. I tell the story all the time about guys coming up to me and saying, "Mark, you write about," and I do. I write about other subjects other than boxing. I love boxing. Have been writing a lot about it. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you want to make money, you should be writing about Taylor Swift or
Right.
Tim McGraw. I think I brought it up last time. I said, yeah, but Taylor Swift's going to have hundreds of biographies written about her, and she should. Okay, but people like Lou Ambers, Johnny
Yeah.
Kilbane, Battling Nelson, let's use Johnny Dundee. How many? These people's lives are worthy. Johnny Kilbane's life was worth worth a book. It's worth more than one book. I hope the family writes one. I hope other people. I said that with the Canzoneri book, and other people who are writing a book about Canzoneri, and it's great. They deserve it. Okay, I mean, a lot of people think the boxing writers are competitive. We're competitive to an extent, but we're also good friends. I mean,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
good friends with a lot of with a lot of people that work with my publisher and other publishers, and you know, and our big of you know, usually we get together in Canastota during the great weekend coming up, and all of us gather from all around the world. You know, friends from Scotland and Ireland and all these great writers. Anyway, but that's good. We support that, and that's the important element. We're about the sport, and which means
Yeah.
we're about each other and helping each other, and giving pitches for other people. You know, which I've done consistently because some of these writers are outstanding, and I want other people to know about them.
Oh yes, that's no, and I think yeah, we commend you for that mark you've made in the sport by just going through the process of writing and telling these stories, and I think that speaks volumes, and that goes a long way, and that stands the test of time because these should go on for time, you know, far beyond when we're gone from this earth. These stories are still going to be there, and people will be able to go to them to be able to get that knowledge of some of these great fighters of the past. There Johnny Kilbane being one of them. Folks, if you're just joining us, of course, we're here with the esteemed Mark Allen Baker, 86 Boxing here representing, and we're talking about his upcoming book on Johnny Kilbane, which, hey, will be out here for purchase here very soon, right, Mark? Got some good news, right?
Yeah, today I learned the official publishing date is the 30th of the month, but the book shipped today. So if you order pre-orders on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, wherever you order, it's going to be available everywhere. And there's a lot of people that have, and thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot to me, and I've been blessed to have so many great boxing fans, you know, believe in my work, and that's the main reason I do that, Dad, and wanting to remember these giants in the sport. So thank you. 250 plus pages, over 50 photos, meticulous notes. Some may call them a little bit very maybe too meticulous, but a lot of notes, a lot of detail. It's what you want. It's what historians and crazy people like me who live and breathe boxing want. They want to know weights. They want to know detail.
Oh,
Where'd
yeah.
you find it? It's everything is sourced so that you know exactly where it came from, and available soon. They're on their way to Amazon now, and if you like it, I have my own website, readmarkallenbaker.com. Drop me a note or drop a review. I'm grateful. I love hearing from the fans, and I'm always accessible, always.
Good stuff, and I'm gonna drop that in the chat as well. And yeah, Mark. So I was going through, as mentioned, the resume is very standout for Kilbane. He had some underrated fighters that some might not know of. I saw that he fought and defeated February 1st, 1915, Rocky, Kansas. That's another one right there that some people might not know of. Rocky, Kansas, very, very good fighter. You know, I've considered doing a video on him myself.
Definitely.
And former champion right there. And hey, I think that just shows you he has a resume littered with names of just great fighters, and these are fighters who had hundreds of fights, you know, and that's putting it literal, hundreds of fights right there, which tells you something. And you mentioned that Kilbane wasn't a guy who had this high knockout ratio, which I think adds more to it because these guys usually have to box their way through contests. You think about the likes of him, Maxie Rosenblum, Harry Greb. These are all individuals with the crazy amounts of fights, but they didn't have that type of one-punch knockout power or anything of that nature.
No, and Kilbane didn't. Okay, to his credit, yeah, he had 25% knockout ratio. Okay, so he did knock out some people.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the Camp Rocky, Kansas. I believe that's the Tazo brothers. Was his name? I think those guys in upstate New York. I mean, Rocky, Kansas. I remember his family going through his induction year, and I talked to them.
Oh, cool.
I can't think of all the details, but his family's still around, and there's so many. I mean, upstate New York. Oh, great fight, Buffalo. Gosh, great fight town. I'm always bragging about Buffalo, the light heavyweights especially.
Oh, yes.
And upstate New York, and always Connecticut when I can. And still a lot of great people. But you bring up Rocky, Kansas is a great story. Rocky, Kansas is like Benny Leonard. You know, you fought him. You know, in one instance, and 2 years later or 3 years later, boom, he's a much different fighter.
Oh yeah.
He's an elite fighter.
Oh yeah, certainly, yeah. But yeah, Buffalo, great fight town. I was thinking of Jimmy Slattery, as I mentioned there. Jimmy Slattery, another great fighter out of Buffalo there. But yeah, Rocky Kansas certainly stood out. Yeah, Lockport Jimmy Duffy. Yeah, he's another one who was a very good one. Jimmy Goodrich. Hey, you're on it there, Dan. Just rattling off some of those great names. Yeah, from that era and or from that area. Yeah, New York is one of those top sort of like fighting states. I think in New York, just some of the fighters that have come through New York, some of the fighters that have come through Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania for me, certainly Philadelphia. Just so many just historic fighters that have come through that city. Just in general, true fight town right there. Hey, we know that there are a number that have come through Connecticut. At least I found out that even more so here in recent times there, Mark. So there's some great fighting states and cities out there.
Absolutely. There's so many good markets. They're so exciting when you start digging them. And again, I've been fortunate enough to live all over the place. Boz just mentioned Baby Joe Messi. And another great, there's so many great fighters. And yeah, I mean, I've been lucky because, I learn everywhere I go. In Connecticut was with its rich history going way, way back, especially for the feathers, for the featherweights, of course. But it's true, wherever you go. I mean, I love Pennsylvania. I mean, I lived in Pennsylvania for a long time outside of Philly, in Lancaster County, with the great Leo Hawk. Another great fighter from Lancaster County, where you weren't supposed to fight. And they had some great places there to fight. Now, I bring up a lot of those things in a lot of my books. I try to touch on a lot of those markets and bring them out. And Pennsylvania, Newcastle, which is where Jimmy Dunn was from. So, you'll see a lot of Newcastle, and you're going to ask yourself, why it's Kilbane in Newcastle? Well, Dunn's using all his connections in Philly and all through across Pennsylvania, especially in Newcastle. So, you see, and everybody, it's so funny because it's a smaller world too. Everybody kind of connects. It's interesting when you start, the more you start doing this, you're like, oh, Jimmy Dunn, there's another guy, so-and-so and so-and-so. Sure, that all the pieces start fitting together.
Oh, that is crazy. As I always say, small world boxing, the sport of boxing in itself is a very small world sport. If you look at it, even though we have boxers worldwide, especially at this particular juncture, very small world. The amount of individuals that you can run into when least expected, with the sport, and then certain connections. Hey, how I got connected with you, very small world, and how that happened as well there, Mark. Shout out to Joe Casano as well. So yeah, thinking about that, it really puts things into perspective. So I don't take a minute of it for granted there, Mark, for sure. And I was going to mention with Kilbane, I saw another person he was in with and defeated, the Welsh wizard, Freddie Welsh. I mean, the names on this guy's resume is insane.
Yes. For some, I don't know why he always reminds me of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. I don't know why, but anyway, it's the names. You're right. I mean, a fantastic fighter. I mean, some of these names, it's just outrageous. I mean, I would love to, a lot of times, you go back and I'm picturing myself, trying to be at one of those fights back in that era. What was it like? And especially the bootleg circuit, because there's a lot of bootleg fighting. People don't realize that a lot of it, for researchers like myself, Kilbane fought as young Jimmy Dunn. Jimmy Dunn didn't have much of an amateur career, didn't want an amateur career.
Okay.
Because I know people have already asked me, so you covered his amateur career. There wasn't really much amateur career to it. Most of it was bootleg boxing under the name of young Jimmy Dunn. It was out of Newcastle, out of that area. That's where, but Kilbane wasn't a guy who wanted an amateur career. He wanted to dive right in. He's kind of like Al Kaline was to baseball. No minor league, right to the top notch.
Okay.
And something to think about it, because look at Lou Ambers. He made so much money in the bootleg circuit. New York bootleg huge. It was huge. And in an era where no decision era, they were running this huge circuit in New York with all these different fighters, even switching names with the guys. It is incredible. It's incredible history.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories of that. And I think about for sure, just in general, yeah, some guys who are fight under different names, things of that nature. Yeah, that really puts it into perspective as well. And we always say, even going back, boxing has done a great job of keeping records of some of these historic fighters and all, but you never know what was going down in some of the back ballrooms or some of the private clubs, things of that nature, because I know when you're reading about some of those in the past, certainly there were fights taking place where, hey, it wasn't necessarily a public audience there. So some of these individuals could have a number of more fights than what may meet the eye or what you may see on the record right there.
Absolutely. I remember doing some work on Carmen Basilio in upstate New York. And had
So,
to bring up your Marine, right?
excellent
So
fighter
you're
right
fighting
there, the
Marine.
upstate onion farmer.
So anyway, and I talked to Carmen about it, and he said, no, I mean, he was out fighting on weekends. I mean, there's so many fights that he had that don't even show up.
Wow.
Don't show up. He was telling me about fights at the New York State Fairgrounds,
Wow.
smokers, that private smokers, because they would get, guys would waltz in and go up to his manager and say, what do you say, Carmen, show up and do 2 rounds with my boss.
Yeah,
He was working over at the rail yards. And money's money, right? Money's money. And if you can get something a little under the table maybe or something, do you do it?
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Money's money. So, and you don't have to pay everybody through the grapevine. So a lot of that went on. We all know that. In the same, we all know about the mob stuff. But the question is, what do you bring up and what do you not bring up?
Yeah.
Which is another one thing too, and it's worth talking about. Records.
Okay.
Let's talk records for a second. I'm wasting. I hope I'm not taking up too much of your time.
No. Hey, I'm all for it. We're dialed in. We're just getting in the groove right here. We're ready. Let's go. Records. Let's get into it.
Records are just, there's no consistency whatsoever. Give me an example, because one of Kilbane's fights that quote unquote counts, right, is a situation in March of 1910. He was fighting this guy named Bobby Trickle. Sounds like a race driver, right? Fighting this guy, Bobby Trickle. Trickle doesn't make it to the fight, okay? But he's got to go because he's got to fight because he needs some money. And he promised the promoter, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, he doesn't show up. So this other guy jumps in. The next thing you know, Kilbane's fighting one guy. And then he says, well, I'm only in here until Trickle shows up. So he fights him for 1 round. He leaves. Trickle jumps in. And then they fight 6 rounds. And that fight counts?
Wow.
That fight counts? What about fights that I'm finding that are only 2-minute rounds?
Yeah.
Are 2-minute rounds? I mean, are we comparing apples and oranges, or what are we comparing here? And these are all the things that drive historians nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, because why is it in there? And I especially the guys in a no decision era. Because the biggest problem we have in the no decision era is the way they're positioning the fights. The promoters have to position them as exhibitions. Trouble is, some of them were precisely that, exhibitions. But that's what we have to sort through. That's the job of the historian. So you see some of Kilbane's fights that maybe some sources say is a legitimate fight. I know for a fact they're not. They're exhibitions. But the level of depth you need to dig to find these things out is hours worth of hard work, that goes into these books. I mean, for me, it's a year, 8 months. First 6 months doing nothing but digging.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. It really is.
Oh yes. Yeah.
But it makes you think, and think about that. You think about glove sizes. You think about all sorts of things. But I wish we were better at really sorting through this. It really needs to be. Somebody really needs to do a deep dive into to a lot of these Hall of Famers records and straighten them out, because they're not there yet. So that's my cut. Now, I know I'm going to get people saying, well, that's Baker's cut, and it's not. Maybe it's not Herb's cut, or it wasn't Kaplan's cut, but that's my feeling on it. There's too many contradictions when you look at certain things.
Oh, yeah. Certainly you can see some of that, and some of it is in plain view, as you mentioned there, Mark. So that would be pretty awesome if someone did go through that process. And I know For instance, BoxRec, it's like the main site out there, probably the more popular site that people go to, but they aren't necessarily 100% accurate on there, of course, as we know. Then you have Cyber Boxing Zone. They've done a good job of digging through some records, and they have a lot of the exhibitions and things of that nature that took place as well.
Mhm.
Not as popular as far as BoxRec, but you can dive between the two and you can see some discrepancies or some fights that are on BoxRec that aren't listed there, or some fights that are on Cyber Boxing Zone that aren't listed on BoxRec. So a multitude of those things, commendable for diving through and trying to dig into such. And I was mentioning to you that I have a buddy, Random Acoustic Thoughts. He has a channel, and he was able to one day find an old Sam Langford fight that wasn't reported on the records. It's an early career fight of Sam Langford. So that goes to show you sometimes, diving through when you're doing what you're doing there, Mark, when you're diving through these papers, some of these old accounts, and you can go down a tangent, but you never know what's going to pop up.
Absolutely, and hats off, because I know a lot of the people. A lot of them are my fellow Eyebrow members.
Yeah,
who worked at BoxRec, work at Cyber Boxing, and they've all done excellent jobs. It's and I'm not criticizing them for the job they did. I'm just saying,
yeah,
and they'll vouch for me, the lack of the inconsistencies that are involved in this stuff. But there's more to do. Thankfully, we've got a lot of historians out there that are publishing and filling in a lot of great gaps. Talked last time I was on, giving hats off to the gentleman who did the Henry Armstrong, but we need more. We need more. There's a lot more room for a lot of these guys that fall in between the cracks. And I'd like, I'm going to keep trying. I hope others do too. I mean, you look through the Amazon list, and the top sellers are Muhammad Ali, right? Muhammad Ali Dempsey is probably half of the top 100, or Tyson. Put Tyson in there too, right? And of course, yes, I feel they deserve it, but it's nice every once in a while when someone surfaces. I remember the story, Jeff Brophy and Jeff at the Hall of Fame, were saying we looked all over Hell's Creation for a resource on Charlie Burley, right? For years, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, comes this beautiful book about Charlie Burley. Can't think of the author's name right now, but
great fighter.
It was a great find. And they don't realize they don't realize what they're doing for the history of boxing. It's wonderful, because I mean, the Hall of Fame has a nice library, and they've tried very hard to get all the pieces. But every time you get a gap like that filled, it does. Boy, it saves the people there hundreds of hours worth of time. When you can get a resource you can count on and say, yes, this is it. And I mean resources where you can go back and double check that it's true. Not these ones. I mean, there's a lot of books out that are just hearsay. And and there's no notes. There's no notes. Well, Baker, you said this. Well, where's the note? Well, show me. I mean, I've been reading boxing books. I'm sure you do too. Gets to a point where you say, why am I reading this? This guy's throwing speculation out left and right. There's no facts to back it up.
Yeah.
And I finally put it down. Great guy, great fighter, but I'm not interested in reading any more about it.
I'm with you there for sure, Mark. Yeah, I need to see some of those facts. I need to see some of those references, things of that nature. You're right about that. I know buddy Random Acoustic Thoughts ran into that recently with a Joe Jeanette book he ended up purchasing. And a number of the things in there were just sort of the author's interpretation and their assumptions, but it wasn't based on what actually happened or what was documented to have happened. So I'm with you there for sure. Melissa Todd dropped by. Hello there, Melissa Todd. Hello to Boz as well. I think did I shout you out there? Boz dropped in. Colleague there. We do a podcast on Sundays. Melissa, she dropped in. Mark sends her regards. And Joe Casano, he's watching as well.
Is Joe on? Happy birthday, Joe.
Happy birthday to you, Joe, for sure. Yeah. Happy birthday, Joe. Still young as ever right there. So keep doing it, Joe. So we appreciate you listening in for sure. But no, that is awesome stuff there. I was going to ask Mark in terms of like Johnny Kilbane, as far as that featherweight pantheon, he's the name that doesn't get mentioned as much. But really, if you think about the great featherweights in history, I would say he has to rank up there. He has to be certainly one of the higher ranking featherweights, and of course, all can be left to interpretation. But man, this is a name that certainly will be out there more, deservedly so. But when I think about great featherweights and looking at his resume, he's got to be up there.
Yeah, he is, and he's been ranked. I mean, Fleischer ranked him for the ring, and he's been ranked by a lot of the organizations now way up there. Not always top 10, but he's always there, and he deserves to be there, as do some of these other people that are in the hall that are feathers. And I hope people. The good thing about this, again, it was just such a pleasure. This book, some books become very arduous trying to complete them and do, take you through the different aspects of their life. This book was so enjoyable to write because he was such a good man. Okay, and he got blasted once Dunn left, and he started throwing out the money figures. He got blasted for the money he was asking to fight. Okay, but how many featherweights since then don't owe something to Johnny Kilbane?
Oh yeah,
because Johnny Kilbane's responsible for taking their purse to a level they've never seen before, and it had now no fault to Jimmy Dunn, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, but Jimmy Dunn didn't do that for Kilbane. Okay, he didn't. He wouldn't go that far. Okay, and Johnny was willing to go that far, and Johnny knew what he wanted. He knew he wanted the feather title, and he also wanted to keep it. And the longer Abe Attell was around, the harder he tried to keep that title. He wanted to beat Attell's record so bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could sense it.
Oh wow!
You could sense it during those final years. From 20 to 23, where he's like, I got to beat Attell, and it was longevity there.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been fighting. He didn't always. He set his terms. He said, I'll fight, but this is what you're going to pay me. And if you didn't pay me, I'm not going to fight. Now, did it cost him? Yeah, he looked terrible in the cricket fight. In the end, he lost. It looked bad, but he knew it was over at that point. I mean, he asked him he gave his feeling at the end, and he gave it. He was honest, and I'm honest in the book too.
Okay.
Every featherweight since Kilbane owes something to him.
Okay.
I'm positive about that, and he deserves more credit just for that.
Okay, so yeah, that certainly puts it in perspective, because I know he ended up having what was, I believe, 4 title defenses, right? So some of that was his stance on ensuring that he got that pay that he felt he deserved there, as far as maintaining that stance, as you mentioned, and being steadfast that, okay, I'll defend this title, but you're going to essentially pay me my worth, and then we'll actually make this happen.
And he had to get in that time frame, because the Walker Law, he was fighting the Walker Law. I think it was Johnny Kilbane. I'm trying to think of who else the other guy was. There was 3 of them that refused to say, I'm fighting. I'm not. You don't have to tell me when to fight. I'll fight when I'm ready.
Okay.
And just because a Walker Law was in place didn't mean they had to follow it. I mean, and that's why it took a while for. I mean, they pushed so hard on Kilbane to go to 126.
Okay.
And finally he gave in. He gave in to Frush. He gave in to Cricky. He had to. He knew it was a matter of time. The writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
They were going to get him one way or the other. So might as well just avoid Dundee, which would have been, I think, catastrophic. But anyway, I mean, he still lost to Cricky, but he wasn't in shape by that point. I mean, he wasn't fighting that much.
Okay, yeah, I saw that. That was because he had fought prior to that. I believe that was 1923, and then 1921 was his previous fight. Now, was this more so the reason that he essentially decided not to continue competing, at least at that level, after losing to Creaky? Or the politics?
Yeah. He said that's it. I mean, it was just the writing was on the wall, and that was it. He didn't, and it's a good thing. Could he have fought? The trick was the winner was going to fight Johnny Dundee before the fight. They knew that the winner was going to fight Dundee, because Muldoon, that was part of the deal. Okay, yeah, I mean, Muldoon waived his suspension in order for him to fight, but the winner had to take Dundee, and that was and I mean, Kilbane would have gone in against Dundee, but I think he would have got massacred. But anyway. Cricky got, I mean, how long was his reign? I forget the amount of days. I actually put it in the book how many, but it was so short that
Yeah.
it wasn't worth recalling, really. But I mean, Cricket was I mean, I don't want to blast him because he's a war hero. He's a war
Yeah.
hero, a tremendous patriot for the French army.
Mhm.
And of course, and Kilbane doesn't get his due for everything he did during World War One. A great veteran
Oh yeah.
there. I mean, come on now. I mean, look at how many guys went in the war, one and two.
Yeah.
And they always bring up baseball. Well, Ted Williams, yeah, it's baseball, but boxing had it too.
That is
Boxing had
true.
guys that lost a lot of time, and Kilbane lost a good year. So I mean,
Oh yeah.
but what was more important? His country and his family, and you gotta admire our veterans. So
Oh yeah, yeah, certainly, yeah, and I think that is a big thing because there were a lot of fighters who lost time due to the war. Real quick shout out to my mom who dropped in, says hello, son, and guest, yes, appreciate you dropping by there, mother, to come check us out. But you are correct in that sense, Mark. Now, in terms of just kind of just going through the life and career of Kilbane, and just thinking about now, I know he was a guy who's about family. I had watched a video that was kind of detailing the situation with one of his daughters passing away
right.
and all of that stuff. Now, and I know he was a family man. So yeah, what was your takeaway as far as Kilbane the man? Yeah, just taking that family side into perspective, and then how he fought, what he fought for. What was your take in kind of just diving in on him from that perspective as this Kilbane, behind the boxing? This is the man himself.
Man of integrity, a man of integrity, and walk the walk. And I bring up specific episodes in the Kilbane book where he got ridiculously good offers to fight, but because he had to be away from the girls for
Hmm.
more time than he wanted to, he said no. He
Wow.
said no. He lived up to it. Okay. His family was, and I bring up as much as I possibly can in there. And again, public service. He didn't have to do
Yeah.
what he was doing. He didn't have to get involved. I mean, he was a name. There's no question he was a name in Ohio and Cleveland.
Hmm.
And for him to go into public service, okay, he's not in it for the pay.
Yeah.
So he's in it because he wants to serve his community, and he did an incredible job with that all the way
Oh yeah.
through. But as everybody can, you hear so many stories, you watch films about people. If I was to try to sell a film on Johnny Kilbane and I painted the picture that was true of what a
Yeah.
great man he was, no one would be interested. What's wrong with the guy? Because
Yeah.
he stuck by his guns,
Right.
because he said, "You want to meet me? You meet my terms," and that was Kilbane. And again, and you're going to meet my terms, but when I'm ready, and if I don't want to fight on Sunday because it's the Sabbath, I'm not going to fight on Sunday. I mean, he wait till you read it. I mean, it's so many
Oh yeah.
specific. I don't, every time I get a chance, I put that in there. And there's a lot of things he did for charity work too.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and I always bring that up. I always bring up people's, war records. And again, take you through, as boring as it might be to some people, the parallels between boxing and bayonet fighting,
Oh yes.
and a lot of things, and I brought this up earlier, I'll bring it up again, but a lot of times writers write books and they get chopped up, and some of the stuff for Kilbane got left out, because I always get, well, you should, what about his public service? I'm like, well, I wrote about it, just didn't, not all of it got in.
Okay.
There was legislation I told you about boxing that I wanted to get in, but not all of it got in. But the point's made, and I'm
Got
catering
it.
to a boxing fan. If you're interested, I'll dig it up for you sometime if people are that interested. But that work was done. The research is done. I remember a book on Madison Square Garden I did a while back.
Oh
I
yeah.
wrote actually two books. Only one got published because the manuscript was so long.
Okay.
It was like 250,000 words, and
Oh, wow.
ended up getting chopped in half into the garden book. But the garden book had to be out. It's a good point. It needed to be done. So
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I want to check that one out for sure. I know we talked about that, some of the parallels with society and Madison Square Garden, the ring that was there, and all of that stuff you had touched on. I had a question in terms of Kilbane post career after Eugene Creaky. did he ever get the itch to want to get back in the ring? You know, sometimes for boxers, hey, they can't stay
You
away.
know, thanks for bringing it up. He did became a prolific referee, and I actually went through his refereeing record, and that is in the book. It is.
Okay.
I detailed all of that. He was a wonderful referee. They all, some of them, like you said, you get the itch,
Yeah.
and you get the itch, and he had it, and he took some fighters under his wing, which a lot of them do. None of them really panned out to be, world champions, but the refereeing he did was incredible. And I know he did referee some International Boxing Hall of Fame members, some of their fights. So that did make it in the book. So you do get a chance to see his record as a professional referee. So so he did. He did things after, and like I said, the 30s. The 30s were tough. I mean, did he and Irene, his wife, have? And they were school. I mean, they knew each other since school. I mean,
wow.
That's how far they went back, and that's where they met. And he and Irene went through some tough times. I mean, all the families did. He lost a lot of money, poured a lot into this health facility that he built. But what are you going to do? All of a sudden, the depression hits, and you can't keep everything going. He couldn't do it. It was the wrong thing at the wrong time. He just couldn't. He tried. He tried to take it out of. He took it once out of bankruptcy court, and with a plan, but he couldn't pull off the plan. So, again, this is all stuff covered in the book. It's detailed, but it paints. I think it paints the picture. I hope everybody gets the picture I'm trying to paint with him. But I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good story.
Oh yeah, that's awesome right there. Yeah, I didn't know about him becoming a referee, but that's very intriguing there. But yeah, I know the depression, that was tough times for many, and a lot of investments went bad for a lot of boxers and things of that nature. Those with who had for the finances and they were successful, so they ran into issues. So yeah, testament to him. Now, did he find? And I suppose this might be rhetorical in some sense and an automatic guess, but I would imagine, did he find politics as challenging as just being in the ring?
Yes, very much. I talk a little bit about some of his speeches that he gave. I quote from some of them, and he got frustrated with politics.
Okay.
He got very frustrated. I mean, which I guess isn't a surprise.
Right.
It isn't a surprise, especially for a boxer, I guess. Because you usually fight with your fists and not with the politics of the situation. But he did get very frustrated with it, and he lived till 1957. He ended up getting cancer. I don't go into a lot of details. Not a lot was available, other than the fact that he didn't know he had it. He knew he was sick, but I was told that the family kept it quiet to try to. It's a devastating all of a sudden you get diagnosed with cancer. It was it's a tough word to take. We've all had family members taken from us that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but his wife died shortly thereafter. Mary was the surviving daughter, and like you said, he's got some wonderful grandkids. And, and that's nice that the legacy continues, and then the name Kilbane, and continues. I'm just so happy to have the chance, especially with my background, being from not far from where his family was from. So it's been fun, and it's a great insight for me. A great insight. Read the Attell book, read the Kilbane book, and you'll learn a lot about featherweight boxing in that time period. There's no question about it. A lot of people surface. You brought up some great names.
And I do have the Attell book, Mark. Thanks, for sending that over. That's one I have to dive into, and I'm looking forward to that connection right there. So because certainly when I saw that name on the ledger of Kilbane, that really just kind of pulled things together. Just it's such a historic featherweight, and then finding out that Kilbane was the man to dethrone him. I think that that you're right. That is polarizing in some sense right there. So connecting both of them together I can imagine that's a treat in itself right there.
And you mentioned polarizing. You're right. Abe Attell and Johnny
Yes.
Kilbane, far apart, and you're going to learn a lot about Abe Attell. And just a quick word on Abe is, as you research him, there's other. You obviously got to read. There's a nice book on Arnold Rothstein, and you gotta read into all the elements, 8 Men Out, all that stuff to get his view on that whole thing. But I dealt with that a little differently. I got my feelings on that too. I never got around to putting them all in the Attell book, but maybe some
Okay.
in the baseball book. But it is nice to
Okay.
see Kilbane and Attell and seeing the differences between the two. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I'm the boxing fans these days. I mean, I'm just so happy to live in a time where boxing fans are so articulate and so good these days, and it's so nice. You run into these people. I mean, and they can talk. They can talk about boxing's past. They're articulate. They know the details, and it's wonderful. I didn't see this 20 years ago. I think a lot has
Yeah.
to do with people like yourself and the internet and some of this film surfacing. And again, I mean, thank God for people like you and all these other people digging out the facts, and it's brought a whole new light. It's brought a whole new light to boxing, which is wonderful. And I know all my eyebrow members can attest to that as well.
Mhm. Oh yes, yes, certainly no, and I appreciate you, Mark, and I know that you coming on, yeah, that's just like an honor and all of that, and the amount of people who follow the channel who have a genuine interest in the history, your name, of course, automatically rung bells in that sense. So, yeah, you are appreciated for what you do, and the technology has been a major piece of it. There, I would say, Mark, yeah, having the likes of YouTube, etc and being able to go out there and dive into stuff online for sure has helped to bring more closer to the history of the sport, I would say. And there's a lot of information out there that's available to you. You can go dive into it. But sometimes we need individuals such as yourself to, hey, put it all together, and then we can just come reap the benefits and rewards of the work you put in.
And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful too to be able to be in contact. I'll give you a great. Just recently, I did the book on Lou Ambers, his biography, and if you recall, Lou killed a man in the ring named Tony Scarpetti, and
Yeah.
I heard from the family,
Oh, wow.
and not too long ago, I think it was his niece. She was in her 80s, and she wrote me a long letter, very heartfelt letter, saying I've never met him. I want to know about him. She actually
Oh,
wrote
wow.
eyebrow, and then I took it. What happens is sometimes when the certain inquiries come into eyebrow, we all
Mhm.
grab the ones we think we can answer. So I sent her a copy of the Ambers book. I told
Oh,
her how
wow.
heartfelt I was at the loss of Tony, and felt that Lou of all people would want me to do that,
Yeah.
because of his spirituality and his belief. And of course, Lou kills him, and then Lou met with his family and went to the funeral, and
Wow.
it was a very difficult position, and I enjoyed being able to do that. I felt like I
That's
closed the
awesome.
door for somebody who was part of the boxing family, and that meant something to me. So I thank her for contacting Eyebrow, and thank Eyebrow for passing that along and giving me a chance to answer on our behalf.
Oh wow, yeah, that's very warming. That's a warming story right there, and yeah, that speaks volumes as well. Just thinking about the fact that you do have uh, family members who are still out there who are tracking and they can learn a lot even from some of the work that you put in. There are people who contact me on the channel and all of that stuff like, hey, that's my great uncle, or that's my great uncle, or whatever it may be. And yeah, it is pretty warming. So that's a very good feel good story right there, Vark. And that shows you that connection and that bridge that boxing provides, as I know I've mentioned before, mentioned in the last time around we were in discussion right there. So the sport in itself, yeah, brings people together, and it's pretty amazing. You know, you can go in, dish it out, and much like the fighters themselves, when it's all said and done, usually, hey, you touch gloves, you dap it up, and hey, you go on about your life and no hard feelings in some sense.
Yeah, and you realize that more and more at events. You realize that when you're sitting ringside and you see the people sitting next to you and you talk to them. You realize it in Canastota. Put a
Yeah.
word in for that weekend, which a lot of us go to, and it's just wonderful. I mean, you sit at chats and watch, Marco Antonio Barreras talk to Eric Morales, like their best buddies, and it's so nice. You see, Gene Fulmer and Carmen talk. You see all these past, rivals talking and sharing one another. But it's the same way with everybody in the boxing community. We all care. I mean, we love the fact that we can take advantage of some of the things that we can take advantage of. Canastota is certainly one of them, and all the organizations, and that goes for the halls of fame, man.
Yep.
Not
Yep.
only Connecticut, but Atlantic City, Indiana, Las Vegas. There's so many good local hall of fames that are bringing people to light that are forgotten, and thank God for them. I mean, I learned so much by getting involved with the Connecticut Boxing Hall of Fame, and we all have people who are active in the sport. That's the other thing, and we've got a couple tremendous judges in our Connecticut group, some former great referees like Joe,
Oh yes.
and so many boxers, trainers, great people that are affiliated with Connecticut boxing, and
Oh yes.
it's a way for us all to stay together as a family, and I love that. I really do. I feel a lot of camaraderie with the Connecticut group. I really do. I've just been very lucky.
Yeah, yeah, great time. Yeah, everyone was great. Yeah, and folks, if you're listening and haven't, you get a chance to get out to Connecticut to the Mohegan Sun, you have to drop by the Connecticut Boxing Hall of Fame. Shout out to Stephen Ike. They have done a great job there. It's in the Mohegan Sun, and it is certainly a wonder to see there. I really enjoyed being able to visit that as well there, Mark, and just getting that Connecticut boxing history and so many names that were revealed that I was familiar with. And I'm like, oh, OMG, like I know him. I know him. I know this person. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of the rewards of it right there. So I'm glad that, we have things like that. Certainly every state deserves to have something of that nature. And you would hope that something of that nature, if not there, comes about at some point. So yeah, that is pretty awesome there. And wow, yeah, just such an amazing time, amazing discussion. I know I've had you for a good bit here, there, Mark, but I know you're always game for it. Real quick, I did want to say, and I said this last time, and this is kind of going back to the Abe Attell thing. I first became familiar with Abe Attell through the Chicago Black Sox scandal. I think I might have mentioned that to you before there. So that's what led me into kind of digging into him. So yeah, a historic fighter right there, a great fighter. And yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about him, and truly not you right there for highlighting him in a biography that you did.
Yeah, and there's a lot. Obviously, there's a lot more, but like I said, there's a lot of great resources on Arnold Rothstein and some of the other people that were involved
Yeah.
in the whole Black Sox 1919 scandal. Once you read some of this and you really start digging, I decided I had to split off a portion of it. I decided, how do I handle it? The biggest beef I had with it all is people forget what actually happened
Yeah.
during that time period. So I gave them all the facts of actually what happened during this scandal period. Now it's up to them to put the pieces together. Well, how does Attell fit? You'll be able to.
Yeah.
It doesn't take long for you to figure out how he fits.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stories about, well, he was, he financed. No, he didn't. He didn't have any money to do it. It would have taken so much money, and that becomes clear after a period of time. And but I just wanted to say what happened, because I was writing a boxing book primarily, but it was an element that people were interested in. So it's a great resource to go back to and say, I don't have to read all the newspapers from that time period about Attell, because Baker's got him here in the biography. I didn't get into opinions. I didn't get it into like, oh yeah, right, Abe, or any of that kind of stuff. I just threw out the facts. Boxing fans are smart. They read between the lines. Sometimes you don't have to say things. I get wise on a couple guys. Like I'll get wise, like why in hell did Jimmy Dunn, pitch Kilbane to fight this guy?
Yeah.
But you got to learn there's quid pro quos and boxing, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, you keep favors in your pocket, right? You keep favor in your pocket. You want to whip it out when you whip it out, right? There's instances. I mean, Kilbane actually here's a champion who's substituted when a fighter didn't show up. How often does that happen now? How often do you hear that, right? All of a sudden, Tyson Fury fills in for a guy who's a heavyweight that can't make the fight. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, certainly
You
not
know
at that
how much?
level.
Yeah, how much money he would lose to do something like that. But yet it happened. It happened.
Wow.
And sometimes you do that for a promoter if the promoter stands by you.
Yeah. Hey, no, hey, and that shows the man you talked about there, Johnny Kilbane, and he was ready and able, willing, and down to do it. So that is certainly good stuff. So very much looking forward to this book, Mark. Yeah, it's on the way here, folks. You heard it from the man himself right there. Read MarkAllenBaker.com. Let me see, I got that right here. Yep. Read MarkAllenBaker.com. You see it there on the screen.
All right. Thank you so much. And like I said, you know, you drop me a line if you're interested. The book will be out before you know it. I'm always interested. I'm always accessible through that website. If you want to ask me a question or need something that I can help you with, talk or whatever. I just thank so many people. I've been so blessed to have so many great people believe in my work. And I just can't thank you enough. I mean, the gratitude is from here. And that goes for you too, Mr. Brewer. I'm very grateful to be on your show. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening.
Thank you. As mentioned, it's an honor. It's an honor to have you on here, Mark. And this will be and continues to be, you know, a testament of the channel in itself. Just being able to have someone such as yourself be able to come on and dedicate such time to speaking boxing history right there. So any way I can return the favor in what ways I can, I'm all for it because I appreciate your time right there. It's very much precious. So you see it there, folks. Read MarkAllenBaker.com. That's how you can get in contact. And it'll be on all the book platforms that you know of, your Barnes and Nobles, your Amazons, you name it right there. I'm looking forward to it as well, Mark. I think it's going to be great. The great Johnny Kilbane. If you haven't heard about him, folks, then this is your opportunity to learn about a great featherweight champion. Came out of Cleveland, Ohio, for that matter. You know, one of Ohio's greatest fighters. I believe that's where James J. Jeffries came from. So Ohio has some history right there. So, hey, I'm going to learn a little something. I know I'm going to learn a great deal right there, Mark. So I certainly look forward to it. And I definitely thank you for taking the time to come on and spend it with us here. This audience, those who will be listening in the aftermath, we thank you as well.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Joshua. And thank you for everyone who texted in and contacted me during the show and after in some cases.